I'm going to show you how people get fat and how they get type 2 diabetes. Then I'm going to show you how people get unfat and how many people can reverse their type 2 diabetes. When we eat food, the food gets converted into glucose or blood sugar. This blood sugar enters our bloodstream to go feed all of our cells. If the food that we eat has more glucose than our body needs, our body stores some of that glucose for later. It stores it in the liver as glycogen. Think of that like a refrigerator. And it also stores it in fat cells. Think of the fat cells like the deep freeze. Now, when we look like this or this, our bodies have something called metabolic flexibility. That means that there's plenty of space in our fat cells and in our liver to store that extra glucose. When we overeat, we just use some of that space. And then when we go to sleep at night, we simply open up the fridge and use some glycogen from our liver to keep us fed during the night. And if we use up all the fuel that's in the liver or the fridge, then we start to burn body fat for fuel. We access the food that's in the deep freezer. But if we overeat too frequently, then we fill up our liver and there's no room in the fridge. And we fill up our fat cells and now there's no room left in the freezer. And now we have something called metabolic inflexibility. There's simply no room left in our subcutaneous fat cells or in our liver for that extra glucose to go. It starts looking for places to hide, and the first place that it can find is the visceral fat. These are cells that are only to be used as last resort. Having lots of visceral fat is dangerous because this fat surrounds our organs like our heart and our liver. But once we've filled up the fridge and the freezer and we've started to dump into the visceral fat, the excess glucose has nowhere to go, and so it just remains in the blood. The body sees all that sugar in the blood and tries to pump out a bunch of insulin. Normally, all that extra insulin would simply get the glucose out of our blood and into the cells where it belongs. But now these cells are full. There's nowhere for it to go. And so no matter how much insulin is there, insulin cannot do its job. The cells have become insulin resistant. When the cells are insulin resistant and there's nowhere for it to go and blood sugar is high, we call this type 2 diabetes. So let's talk about how to reverse it. Number one, we need to stop putting in so much food fuel. If every day we give our body periods of time with no food fuel and we start to use instead the food that's in the fridge or the freezer, we can start to reverse the problem. Giving ourselves breaks from this is also known as intermittent fasting. While we're fasting, we're emptying out the fridge. And then we can start working on the freezer and getting energy from our fat cells. As we use our fat fuel, we begin to shrink. In this state, the glucose has nowhere to go, and so it gives us high blood sugar. But if we simply free up some space in our fat cells and in our liver, we've got flexibility again. Once we have flexibility again, we can still enjoy delicious food from time to time without paying a high price. There's a really great protocol for this in my fiber and fasting playlist.